Yesterday, let me turn this light on, I can see better here, yeah. Hey, so yesterday, Pope Francis, addressing the Vatican Diplomatic Core, which represents 183 countries, condemned cancel culture. Something us conservative Republicans have been doing in America for quite a few years now. This is what he said. This is according to Political's reporting this morning, and I'm just going to read you what he said about cancel culture. Cancel culture is invaded many circles and public institutions. As a result, agendas are increasingly dictated by a mindset that rejects the natural foundations of humanity and the cultural roots that constitute the identity of many people. Under the guise of defending diversity, it ends up canceling all sense of identity. This risks silencing voices that defend a respectful and balanced understanding of various sensibilities. The Pope also said that cancel culture is a form of one-track thinking that wants to rewrite the past through a modern-day lens. And he warned that any historical situation must be interpreted in accordance with the hermeneutics of that particular time. He concluded his attack on cancel culture by saying diplomacy is called to be truly inclusive, not canceling, but cherishing the differences and sensibilities that have historically marked various peoples. And, yeah, pretty interesting. So, last week, Pope Francis last week he was criticizing this culture that, don't cherish life anymore. Last week he was kind of criticizing people, saying, people adopt 2-3 dogs, but they won't adopt a child in need of a home. People won't have children anymore. And he encouraged people to have more children. And if you can't have children, adopt. So, you could see that being canceled because the left is driven by fear. And one of the things the leftist leaders do to keep people fearful is tell them, climate change, the world is going to end in 10 years. I've been hearing this for the past 50 years. If we don't let the government take control over business, business is going to pollute the world to the point where we're not going to survive in 10 years. Al Gore said Miami would be underwater. He said this in 2000, I believe. He said in 2012, Miami would be underwater. Well, I live in Florida, and Miami's not underwater. I just seen AOC out here partying last week in Miami. Maskless. Her triple vaccination dose didn't keep her from getting COVID, though. But that's another story. Getting back to the cancel culture. You see, I also, it's funny because also today, I seen a report from a cancel culture network, MSNBC, where they were commenting. They sent an email. A producer sent an email to Rachel Maddow and said, hey, I want to get a comment on this. There's people in North Carolina that are trying to get Representative Madison Cawthorn not to run, saying it's illegal for him to run. They're trying to actually cancel this guy from running because he addressed a Trump rally on January 6th. So that's their new way of canceling us, It's not enough to cancel us on social media and the network news stations. Now they want to even cancel people from running and representing anyone who has opposing views to them. But what's interesting is they didn't know they copied his office. So he wasn't supposed to see this email, but he did. They made the mistake and copied his office by mistake. And it said, we'd like to get a comment from his office, but I don't think we should reach out to him because we take the risk of him wanting to come on the show. God forbid if the left allowed an opposing view on a network news station. Pretty interesting. So check that out. Madison Cawthorn, if you don't know, He's a disabled representative, House of Representative, congressman from North Carolina that the left cannot stand because of his conservative views. Very pro-life, very pro-American, freedom-loving young man. Very young. I think he's in his 20s. So, but this cancel culture started years ago. I remember in the 80s, Reagan came out, after, 4 years of Jimmy Carter. He was like almost as bad as Joe Biden. But it was, at that time, it was the worst president we've seen up until now, Joe Biden. But the country was like so over these Democrats trying to solve every problem with bigger government. And Ronald Reagan came out and said, government isn't the solution. Government is the problem. And it was so refreshing that people just loved him. But the left, that runs our universities, had all these Ivy League college kids brainwashed to think that Ronald Reagan was a Nazi. Ronald Reagan was this evil man. So whenever Reagan would go to a university, or any of his administration would go to a university to speak, there was a thing back then they called shouting down. They would shout down the people. Like, they wouldn't even allow the people to speak. And, in a place where free speech is supposed to be sacred, if it was an opposing view, so they would literally, I remember Edwin Meese, like, everyone would just shout while he was speaking. They tried to do this with Reagan, but Reagan got the crowd quiet for a moment and said to one of these young college students, "Why are you so angry? Why are you so angry at me?" He said, "Because, you're so old, you don't even know. You can't even relate to us. When you were my age, you didn't even have radio or TV. How could you relate to me?" And Ronald Reagan answered the kid back by saying, "Yeah, you're right. When I was your age, we didn't have radio or TV. We were too busy making radios and TV for you guys." So they didn't sit around watching TV. They were too busy inventing TV. So I love Reagan. God bless Ronald Reagan, man. He was awesome. But then even like a few years ago, Ben Shapiro. Now they took it to a new level. Now, instead of shouting these people with opposing views down, they protest so the college wouldn't even allow them to come on the campus. And I remember Ben Shapiro, all these college kids protesting, saying he was a Nazi, a white supremacist. Ben Shapiro is a Jew. Ben Shapiro is a devout Jewish man who has ancestors who were killed by Hitler. So not only do these universities brainwash these students and indoctrinate these students to be so freaking left-wing communist thinking, have a worldview of a communist, they leave them ignorant. Like, they don't even know what they're talking about. They sound so stupid. They think they're, and the Bible says, in the last days, they'll profess to be wise and they'll become fools. They're so foolish. And I'll never forget the time I'm hearing about this college, like, so mad because this dude, they were going to allow this dude to speak. And they were calling this guy a white supremacist, a Nazi extremist. And I'm expecting to see this huge dude, bald-headed dude with tattoos on his head. And when I tune in to see the guy, it was Milo Yiannopoulos. And if you're not familiar with Milo, at the time, he was the most flamboyant homosexual, dressed, really good dresser. But he had conservative political views, and they just could not stand that. And I listened to him for the first time, and I was like, wow, no wonder they're afraid of him. Because, physically, he ain't that tough. But verbally, he could articulate and destroy anyone's. This guy was amazing. And then later, I started watching this, Googling this guy, and I seen him defend the Catholic faith. And he gave such a defense of the Catholic faith. I was like, wow, this guy's an apologetic. He's an apologist. He's a great apologist for the church. But he's gay. What's up with that? And then he was humble enough, to be honest, to say, yeah, I struggle with this sin of homosexuality. I'm not gonna, but he didn't try and defend it and say it was right. He admitted it was wrong. And God bless Michael Voris, because Michael Voris called him out on it, in the tough Michael Voris fashion, straight freaking to his face, and told him, you need to get right with the Lord. You need to, you can't be in the sinful lifestyle if you're a Catholic. And by the grace of God, Milo came out shortly after that and said God has given him the grace and the strength to take him out of the homosexual lifestyle, and he's no longer a homosexual man. He's a straight Catholic man. And, a lot of liberals watching and saying that's impossible. It's not impossible. I've met straight evangelical men that were homosexuals at the time. God can change people, The left don't want you to hear that, but there's hundreds of men, thousands of men that can attest to that. So the left has always been trying to stomp out free speech. And our founding fathers knew that free speech was the most important aspect of a free society, because every dictator, every tyrant, every communist regime, the first thing they want to get rid of is free speech. But the founding fathers knew that it was the most important freedom we have. That's why they made it the First Amendment. And they tied it right in equally with the freedom of religion, that the government could not stop our religious expressions, right there in the First Amendment, because they knew that goes hand in hand. And I think Pope Francis is seeing this around the world, where Christians are being censored in America and being arrested in so-called free democracies in Europe for what they call hate speech. Because if you speak the truth of the Catholic Church, that homosexual acts are a sin, that abortion is the gravest of moral sins, it's considered hate speech by those on the left. And they want to shut that down. But thankfully, the founding fathers knew we needed a Second Amendment to protect the First Amendment. So in America, they're never going to shut us down. There's too many freedom-loving Americans. They're not going to shut us down. But I thought that was pretty interesting. If you want to see the article, it's in the Politico online. You can go to Drudge Report. They have that same article. But yeah, Pope Francis condemns cancel culture, and we should all condemn cancel culture, because once the left starts regulating speech, they'll take away our most important thing that we need to do, is share the gospel. And sometimes I talk about politics, sometimes I talk about cultural issues, but if you notice, if you pay attention, if you watch the video to the end, I always bring them to our most important message. I always bring them to the message that we need to proclaim as Catholics. And that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's Jesus telling the world that he is the way, the truth, and the life. That no one gets to Father God except through Jesus. And the message that Jesus established the church in Matthew chapter 16, verses 18 and 19. And that church is the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church is the only church that can trace their historical roots back to Jesus, back to Matthew 16. The Catholic Church is the only church that could prove it's the church that Jesus Christ started. The Catholic Church is the only church that can prove that we teach the fullness of the faith, everything the apostles and the Lord taught. So I always bring people back to the truth. So you may get annoyed if you disagree with me with politics, but no, if you're a Christian, if you're a Catholic Christian, our goal is the same, to bring people to Jesus Christ, to bring them home to the church that Jesus established. And I learned this technique from Billy Graham, out of all people. I used to watch Billy Graham when he was alive, and he had a gift. First of all, he had a gift of likability. Some may call it charm, some may call it charisma, but I call it the gift of likability. He could get people that opposed him to like him. And he counseled every president from, I think, like Eisenhower. Republican and Democrats would take his biblical counsel, his godly counsel. He would give them spiritual advice, even though he would disagree with them politically. But then I would see him on the news. So he would, had a high profile. He was on all the major news networks. And, but no matter what issue he would talk about, he would always end the conversation about bringing them to the Lord. And he would always quote John 3:16. Now, Franklin Graham uses the same technique, I noticed. He learned it too. I like Franklin, but honestly, I got to say, I don't think he has that gift of likability like his dad did, just they're two different personality types, I guess. But, the left wants to take that ability away, they want to choose what I can say, during the election, they demonetized me. That was like a warning shot to me, when I was talking about politics. But a lot of guys with bigger platforms than me, they totally took down because they disagreed with them, Twitter banned the president of the United States, but they let the Taliban tweet still to this day. I mean, it's insane. And the problem is the 80s, all those kids that were shouting down Ronald Reagan and Ed Meese and all of, the people that represented the Reagan administration, all those kids, those foolish kids who shouted down the opposition, they're now in charge of big tech companies that are shutting us down. They're now in charge of ABC, NBC, CBS. They learned how to cancel us in the 80s, and now they're running big companies. But American freedom cannot be stopped. So pretty soon, Devin Nunes and Donald Trump are going to start that new platform I'm really excited about. And I think it's going to be to social media what Rush Limbaugh was to radio. I think they're going to crush the opposition, because even people that disagree with us like the idea of freedom and not getting censored. So God bless America, stay Catholic, and pray for Pope Francis.